Hello everyone, we're now in Module 2 of the course. This is assignment number 1. To do well in this assignment, understand what's going on, you need to finish the last assignment of the last module. And in that assignment, there's a really important paper for the context of what we're learning right now. And that one is by Kenneth Morrison. And it was the paper, The Cosmos as the Intersubjective. Native American other than human persons. That paper is extremely important because it really brings up the idea of an animistic religious perspective, what it means to have that perspective and being in the world as a worldview that allows you to have a particular, real relationship with the world and a spiritual relationship with the world in particular ways. It also introduces this sort of idea that beings in the world have agency and power. In other words, they can conjure supernatural powers. They're theirs for their use. And this is a unique sort of point of view. Contrast that to sort of our sort of contemporary or mainstream religious sort of perspective. I can't say contemporary because there's so many different types of religions now, but let's look at something like Christianity or Islam or Judaism. You don't have power. I can't just draw power and use it magically for any sort of reason, right? And it's that bifurcation, that separation that sort of defines what our mainstream sort of stratified hierarchical religions, these monotheistic religions are, compared to an animistic perspective where power is absolutely available and is also negotiated. And different sorts of beings in the world have different forms of power, and the world is definitely alive. So that paper is essential reading to understand what's happening in this section. So we will continue with that. A couple of things we're trying to do here in this assignment is try to figure out, what sort of distinctions can be made between magic and religion, if they can be made at all, and if the bifurcation between magic and religion is simply a product of our society trying to disenfranchise you from any power or agency. And we'll look at an animistic perspective and what sort of magic is within that, more specifically in the context of a Native American group. So we'll be looking at a paper, and this one was written by Jay Laughlin and is called Songs of Power and Appeasement, the Magic/Religion Distinction in Cherokee Songs and Prayers. And Jay is a mythologist, folklorist, anthropologist, and reflecting on how folks in this Eastern Woodlands culture, the Cherokee, what kind of perspective did they have about personal power, impersonal and impersonal claims to power in the world, and how that power was shared, and sort of what sort of religious sort of viewpoint came from that. And so that'll be a very important sort of theoretical cornerstone for you. Additionally, in that paper, what I want you to pay attention to, and very important, is Jay is going to run down some of the history of early anthropologists in the late 19th century making the first distinction between magic and religion, trying to find what religion was. And of course, that was based on what they knew about it from their own perspective, or what they thought as these monotheistic religions being somehow higher or better or true religions compared to something like animism. And it only showed you the cultural chauvinism, if not the very great ethnocentrism, that actually existed in the earlier anthropological sort of times, and how far we've come in to try to understand some of the valors of the animistic perspectives, and maybe being able to reflect on what we might have lost, right? So this is a really important paper, right? Now, the next thing is trying to understand what ritual is. We heard this a lot, this idea of ritual. Essentially, I'll give you a very quick definition of it. There's hundreds of them out there. A ritual is the enactment of a myth or a segment of a myth. And its purpose is a functional one. It's to denote change. And change can be of consciousness, a way of thinking about something, or it can be a change of person, an actual functional role in life. And rituals are really where it's at when religion is concerned, because while religions exists only in our heads, it's how we enact our work, how we act on those thoughts that produce behavior, which create groups of people that do things together to create cultures. From an anthropological perspective, we're really interested in the cultural large group behavior. In the previous module, we were kind of focusing on psychological issues. Those are from perspectives of psychologists. We're trying to look at the effect of things like religion on individuals. And you saw Carl Jung, that was all about the individual going through transformations of states. But he never said anything about how those individuals would interact collectively within groups of people who are all moving towards individuation, and what sort of overall culture would you have. Well, this is squarely in the realm of anthropology, and we're really interested in that. How do collective groups of individuals who regularly participate in religious rituals and ceremonies, what is the behavior and creating a large worldview, and creating activities and cultures, in particular types of cultures. Well, the way to sort of start getting at this is the last reading I have on the list, and that one's by Stein and Stein. That's the one you should probably, I would say, read up to about page 85, and that's in chapter 4. Now, he doesn't know from 185 before chapter 4 starts. Try to get to about page 85, and they're going to discuss the many different types of rituals, and there are lots of rituals which are out there. Rituals of bringing up new ideas, rituals of healing, rituals of revitalization. But what we're going to be doing, just for the purpose of case study, and since we don't have a lot of time, is looking at rites of passages. These are the transformations of individuals and to new roles in society. And the reason that we're going to do this is because we actually kind of started with it. The films that you watched, The Power of Myth, Joe Campbell in the film, he's really, aligned very closely into the psychological perspective of Jung, which is great. But he doesn't go into a great deal about how, ritual creates overall large culture. He only talks a little bit about what happens when there's an absence of ritual, right? And the effect upon individuals. And then we can look at the deterioration of culture. He mentioned there's a problem. The myths with ritual are just not there anymore. And the ones that were really concerning were rites of passage. So we'll look at how Native American groups sort of handle rites of passage, and they are active in many cultures. The last viewing that you saw in Module 1 looked at the Lakota Sioux. In Lakota Sioux, their ritual life is sort of haphazard in many ways, some because it's syncretically blended with Christianity. So it's a very fragmented culture on many of these reservations because so many different Native American groups were thrown together. Then you had Christian missionaries coming in, and it creates a really strange amalgam of many, many different identities and a lot of conflict because of it. But if we could look at more homogeneous sort of Native American groups, based on their sort of literature and their practices, something else begins to unfold, that we can get a constant view, or a very good steady view, about how animism is very closely allied with their ritual practices. And we'll be doing that through two things. We'll be looking at ritual in the Mescalero Apache. These are a group of Native Americans that live in the White Mountains of New Mexico. They're still there. You can visit them anytime. You have to get out the highway. But they keep a lot of their cultural practices in play, their traditional stuff, because they're trying to keep their culture in play. Without a mythological framework and without their rituals, their culture would literally fall apart. So it really does address the idea of what is the importance of religion and religious ritual in maintaining an actual integrated sort of culture and cultural life. So I want you to watch the first film. It's a short one, and it actually is entitled Inside an Apache Rite of Passage into Womanhood. This film will take you through what's happening with young girls as they make a transition from adolescence into womanhood. And it is a real, genuine transformation. The film is light on the mythology behind it because there's just not enough time to sort of develop it. So to supplant that, to help us with that, there's a paper right below it we're going to read by Inés Talamantes, and she is fabulous. She's the leading, she knows all of this. She's the leading researcher on this and theorist on this. And it's been a tremendous amount of time with the Mescalero Apache. So she wrote a relatively short essay on on how the mythological themes are incorporated into the ritual and how these young girls go through the ritual to produce change, to produce an adolescence into womanhood. But additionally, it's not just the young girls that go through the change, it's the rest of the entire community, it's the rest of the tribe. Because the one thing we have to get down about ritual, it doesn't happen alone. It always happens in groups. It's the entire community that's actually involved in these things. So many people say, well, I have a morning ritual. I get up and brush my teeth. I said, no, you have a morning habit. That's not a ritual. One, there's no mythological themes. There's no magical interpretation involved. And there's no community watching you. Therefore, there is no power in that ritual. It's simply habitual behavior, right? So we're going to be looking about what it is that takes to make a religious ritual. And what is the power of those rituals? All right. In Inés Talamantes' essay, I think one of the most important pages, and it is many essays, is the very last page. And I don't think there's any conclusions here that are drawn, but I think there's some important observations about what it is for us not to have these important rituals, these rites of passage of transformation for our youth now, and what it portends for their lives. In living as an adult in our society. And in this particular case, it's talking about women. For me, they're our most sensitive groups because largely the public space has been constructed through male practices. Males have created this in the past. And then females leave the domestic space, but they come into a pre-constructed male space with all the rules and everything already developed by males, and they have to sort of interact and play with this, right? So that really isn't a female identity that's been adjoined to it. It's females trying to negotiate that space, and we can see it every day within the conflict in public life. And it also means that females don't have the image that males do because of that, because of the structural power indifferences. You'll see something in the Mescalero Apache that this is not the case. When that woman becomes a publicly recognized woman, I mean, when that girl, I mean, she got power, and there's no way you can see it in her face, and the men are just like in awe, like they know, everyone recognizes this. That's the idea of rite of passage and of ritual. Well, Inés Talamantes mentions there's a lack of that. And I want you to think about this. What should we do? What should we do to help our young women find their place in the world with power? Solidity. Everybody recognizes this, right? So we can treat women with respect finally, instead of objectifying them like we have in the past. I mean, I'm a little bit biased. I'm raising girls right now, and that's my one big concern, is that they can go out in the world and be treated with respect and equals and be given, you know, a place in which they actually deserve, a place of importance. So think about what we might do to bring back ritual for young women. I mean, even the young men too. We all have to go through life transformations in correct ways. Now, what's very important, though, I want you to consider the differences between the type of rituals that we think we have and the type of ritual in which that actually is a rite of passage. For example, let's take this. Now, reflect back on when you left high school, and there was this graduation ceremony. Let's think about how that was sort of set up. So there's an audience, a community around you. There's a place where you go, where you separate away from everybody else. And something distinguishes you as being separate. They're in this threshold. So what do? You wear your funny little gown with the tassel, the funny little hat on one side, right? Notice that's not normal clothing that you just wear outside. So it makes it sort of outside of the bounds, or the ego doesn't know how to make of this, because this is something you wouldn't wear every day. You have moved out of the space where the ego is in control, because you know you're not wearing that hat on a date. Think about it. Are you going to go shopping at the mall with that funny hat and that gown on, just walk around? You wouldn't be caught dead on it. But you would do it at a graduation. And so we're back in sort of a Jungian world where the ego is no longer in control. Everything becomes special, right? Everything, all the symbols around, there's all sorts of things going on. So you're separated. Well, the next thing you got to do is you have to go through a transitional sort of period. And this transitional space is between being the pre-graduate and being the graduate. So how do we make this transition? We climb up on the stage, the music is playing, Everyone's looking at you, and you move across the stage, and there's another dude over there, or lady, with even funnier hat than you've got, with colors everywhere, and she's holding the sacred scroll with your diploma, your fake diploma in it, with a little seal, and she confers upon you almost magically. Like there's just transference of being that comes upon you, and you move across the stage, and you become incorporated into a new identity. Right? And then you sit down in a different group. You're not in the same group before. You take your little tassel and you move it the other way, right? So that symbolizes a transition and incorporation. What you've seen is just a 3-part movement that every rituals have. I don't care what ritual it is. If we look at a rite of passage, they have 3 parts. If we look at any other ritual, 3 parts. Separation, right? Transition, incorporation. Even when it comes to rituals about new ideas, we bring up new ideas, they separate them from old ideas. We go through transition, we ritualize the new idea, celebrate it, and we reincorporate it as this new mythological idea that will be the way of being in the land. Right? The thing about high school graduations is they don't quite make the religious threshold because there's not a really strong mythology behind them with some magical elements. If you throw the magical elements in there, the slightly counterintuitive concepts and beliefs, then you activate archetypes. You go deep to within the subconscious. And that's not just you, the person that's actually going through the rite of passage. It's also the community around you. And that's one thing we want to think about, too, when we're watching these rituals, is that rites of passages or any ritual can never happen alone. You can't just sit in your room and go, okay, I'm having a ritual right now. I'm in high school graduation. And now I put on my magic hat. I walk around the room. I take off my little magic hat, or I turn it tassel the other way, and now I'm a graduate. And I feel like I made that transformation. That doesn't work. It takes an entire community to be around you to watch it happen. And it is the force of the community, all eyes upon one, in this sort of ritual jubilation. And what the crowd does is it produces a psychological effect known as communitas, an intense feeling of community and expectations, so that when you make or go through transition, you're not going to go backwards. Right? Like think about it, if you're a high school graduate, you're going or trying to be a graduate, you're walking across that stage. What happens if you just said, wait a minute, if I go down there, that means I got to get a job and be a self-responsible adult. But what if I could just go backwards and sit back down and keep my tassel over here and go back to school next year? How easy life would be. Well, what keeps you from going backwards? It's the crowd, the communitas, pushing you with its hopes forward, right? Propelling you to a new identity, right? So there's an absolute structure to ritual. Now, this is something that's actually discussed in Stein and Stein, chapter 4. They do a pretty good job at it, and it starts on page 93. They talk about these 3 stages of ritual. The one thing I do want you to pay attention to is an additional term, and it's called liminality. Liminality, look for it. And that's when you're in this transitional phase, and you're betwixt and between, 2 sort of identities moving across the threshold, like across the stage to get your diploma. And what prevents you from going back, of course, is the communitas and the crowd pushing you forward. It's this real sensitive thing because change is something that doesn't come easy. We need to have a reason to push, right? And that push is the crowd's expectations. We want to fulfill the expectations for others. So there is a big structure, and we're going to see that particularly in the Mescalero Apache. So note that. All right. I won't go on about that. I'll let you get to this work and try to get this stuff done by I think this one by Monday night. I think you'll be on good time. We have another short quiz coming up in, I believe, 11 days from now. So we have 11 days for the next one to come out. So we'll get this assignment done Monday, and I'll have the next one posted up for you. In the meantime, any questions, concern, hit me up. A phone is really a really good idea because I can get to your problems right at the moment. If you're comfortable with that, of course, texting is fine too. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.